On the 2nd of November 1975, on an abandoned lot in Ostia, Rome, lay the deformed and charred body of Italian poet and filmmaker Pier Paolo Pasolini, a controversial figure for his time and even to this day. When found, police suspected that his injuries were that of a mafia-style killing, but no one knew what led him there, and we still don't. It is believed that the film reels of his last film, which was stolen earlier that year, would be in Ostia, and Pasolini came to retrieve them. Pasolini was a socialist and a gay man, which at the time in Italy was frowned upon. The man had a very complicated relationship as a public figure, as he felt that the world was going into a negative space for what he would have called cancel culture, setting restrictions up especially after the reign of Mussolini. His response to this was to create a series of films labelled The Trilogy of Death, the first of which was meant to be a critique on the way in which he felt the world was going. A little film called The film was still released 3 weeks after Pasolini had died. The stolen film reels were never recovered, and so for the movie they had to do alternate takes as well as reshoot some of the scenes. The culprits of which are theorized to be the mafia, neo-fascists, young actors as revenge for the treatment of the actors in the film, the young men of the area, some of which had prior relationships with Pasolini. Regardless of who or why the film was stolen, it did not change the outcome. The movie was released to outrage. If you are unaware of what this film is, or even the novel in which it originates from, then I will explain it. As much as I'd like to not talk about this movie, I will give a very, very brief and heavily censored description of this movie, as if I say anything more descriptive, this video would get flagged. So, Salo originates from the novel of the same name written by Marquis de Sade, the man in which the word sadism originates from. Where am I? Okay. Follows the 120 days of a group of aristocrats during the Second World War, where they have kidnapped a group of teens and young adults, and decide to do the most disgusting and irreparable things to do to these people, all whilst an old sex worker tells everyone about the horrific things she had seen and done in her time, most of which is then reenacted on the young adults. Pier Paolo Pasolini was stabbed, beaten, run over by a stolen Alfa Romeo, and then later burned. Died to tell that story. So you've seen the title of this video. Why am I talking about this sick After the release of Stalker 2, I felt it was appropriate to see one of his influences, the Tarkovsky adaptation of the Strugatsky brothers' novella Roadside Picnic, a film that, as I write this script, I currently have not watched, but has suspicions of having killed multiple cast and crew, including Tarkovsky himself. But I'm getting ahead of myself a bit here. Let's give a brief description of the story first. After multiple sittings, I have finally finished all of Stalker. This is the first Tarkovsky film I have seen, and it was definitely a bad choice to start with. Whilst it may be his best work, it's not for me. I felt if I spoke about this movie, it's only right that I see it and it's easily accessible. So this is not going to be a video about how amazing or how much of a visual poet Tarkovsky is, and how
filmmakers. It's a tragedy. and it makes Stalker even more haunting. I urge everyone to watch this movie.
Film Stalker itself is my zone, where I can throw my ideas in any direction and learn about everything.
But first, we're going to talk about Andrei Tarkovsky, son of a translator and poet, was born into a Russian Orthodox Christianity faith, something he has followed his entire life, even bringing thoughts and ideologies into his movies. The image of the holy fool comes from the Old Testament, described as they often employ shockingly unconventional behavior or imitation of insanity to challenge complacently accepted values, to deliver unpalatable prophecies or other teachings, and to cloak their own sanctity, so deflecting worldly honour. If we look through Kierkegaard's interpretation of faith and follow the story of Abraham and Isaac from the book of Genesis, the story goes as Abraham, an old man, has been waiting and praying to have a son, only for it to happen later in both his and his wife's lives. Isaac is born, and Isaac is Abraham's pride and joy, and will do anything for his son. He is then told by God that he must sacrifice Isaac at the top of Mount Moriah. Abraham, conflicted, believes his faith in God and takes Isaac to the mountain, only for at the last minute God to intervene and gives a ram for Abraham to sacrifice instead. Kierkegaard describes this as a leap of faith. Whilst not losing everything physically or morally, it is Abraham's willingness to sacrifice everything that brings everything to him. His commitment to faith without knowing the consequences is what brings him enlightenment. This can be said about the holy fool, leaving us with where does this holy fool fit into our story? Stalker has three main characters, the professor, writer, and titular stalker, who enter into the zone, a wasteland blocked off by the government, as whatever goes into the site either doesn't return or comes back changed, except the stalker, who takes people in and out of the zone in some sort of dark tourism. Stalker takes the professor and writer into the zone with hopes of reaching the room in the heart of the zone. When you enter the room, it will grant you your greatest desire. The movie starts in sepia tone, with who we do not yet know is the stalker, as he gets out of bed and makes himself a drink. It is quiet, except for the loud and thunderous trains going past, mundane, until his wife wakes from the bed, pleading for the stalker not to leave. They live in a world of rot, and the stalker needs an escape. The stalker meets up with the two men he will be taking into the zone, the writer and professor. They meet up at what is the remains of a bar, as they talk about their intentions and reasons for going into the zone. The sound of a train goes past to signal the time to leave. They make their way out to sneak into the area, evading guards and following behind a train filled with some sort of equipment. Bullets follow behind them. They only reach a place of safety when they arrive at an old mine car attached to a track. With the decrepit space they live in, they have to use the remains of the world to arrive. We follow the men in this car in silence for 3 minutes and 45 seconds, awaiting their arrival. Arriving at the place we have only heard of like myth, these men are taking a leap of faith. into the zone. We enter the zone. The colour changes, showing luscious greenery surrounding the remains of what is the industrial human life. A fog surrounds the men, making it impossible to see further out of the zone. The men stop, looking at their surroundings as Stalker wanders off, leaving the other two men behind to relay to each other the rumours they've heard of the zone. They begin to talk about our Stalker's teacher, a man nicknamed Porcupine, a prolific stalker who had entered the zone one day and returned with riches. A week later, he hung himself. We will return back to Porcupine's story later on, but for now, we'll come back to our Stalker, who feels at home here in the zone, laying in the grass around him. He is in bliss. He is home, back in his own Garden of Eden. The men regroup as they start their venture to the room, having to follow the path the Stalker sets out for them, following bolts tied to a string. We come across a wasteland, tanks and military vehicles abandoned. The greenery around them envelops them, almost drowns the past of the war. Whilst we are only told of the dangers of the zone by the Stalker, the remains of a war is our protagonist's first warning. Leading our men a stone's throw away from the room, the Stalker decides to change course and go another way to the room, claiming it to be too dangerous. Whilst the professor and writer begrudgingly agree to follow him, it is after the writer attempts to pick some of the plant life that, after warning him, the Stalker throws a pipe his way, telling the writer,
«Зона требует к себе уважения, иначе она карает».
Карает. Только попробуйте еще раз что-нибудь такое. У вас что, языка нет?
if you do. The zone demands respect. If you don't, it will punish you. This is the first strike which seems to cause tension amongst the group, and truly, how real are the dangers in the zone? We have only one person telling us this, and yet we don't see it. From this point on, you can see the Stalker as Tarkovsky's holy fool. Tarkovsky tends to insert archetypes into many of his films, starting with Andrei Rublev, loosely based on the real story of Andrei Rublev, a 15th century Russian painter. The film tells a story of a painter who takes a vow of silence to never paint again after seeing the aftermaths of war. Later, he tries to find peace. He begins to paint again. We can see the Stalker's beliefs. He wears them on his sleeve. But we will see further into the zone if the men around him follow him in his beliefs or not. The writer tries to storm directly to the room, against all warnings, only for him to stop just before the entrance. Something telling him not to go any further. The writer tries to pay it no mind, but returns to the rest of the group as they begin their detour to the room. The Stalker, looking for where to travel through next, away from the group, gives a silent prayer in hopes that his companions believe the danger they're in and hopes their passion will be correct. He then leads the men to a tunnel, only for the professor to leave his bag behind. He insists on going back for it, but our guide says it's lost and we must continue forward. The writer and Stalker continue through the tunnels, reaching one spewing with water. The professor has disappeared. Believed to have gone back for his bag, the other men continue on the thought that he is a lost cause. The men get through to the other side, only to see the professor sitting down next to his bag. Whilst the men initially believe the professor somehow passed them, he tells them that he truly did go back for his bag, and that they have returned back to where they started. The men look confused, whilst the Stalker feels unwell, and believes it is a trap that they had somehow survived getting through. The men go to rest and lay all The men go to rest and all lay down in the marsh, becoming one with the zone as their bodies blend into the dirt. As the men lay there, we return to the sepia world we began with, as the water next to these men filled with dirt and trash, the remains of the land that once was. The Stalker recites Revelation 6, verse 12, as the camera hovers over the water. The verse recites the story of Jesus, opening the scrolls containing God's judgment, specifically the 6th scroll. The verse describes natural disasters hitting the earth, the result of God's thoughts on sin. The Stalker is the most knowledgeable of the zone, and a reminder to himself and his party that the zone is not something to mess with, relating it to the power of God. The act of sin will result in the chaos that now surrounds them, as we can see the remains of the world underwater. As the men wake up one by one, the Stalker speaks to himself of the tale from Luke 24, the first appearance of Jesus after his resurrection, noticed by 2 of his disciples on the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. The 2 disciples do not recognize Jesus when they meet him, and on the road they are surprised that this man have not heard of what happened in Jerusalem. The disciples then tell stories of his crucifixion. In return, Jesus tells tales of the Old Testament and what the Old Testament had predicted about Christ himself. After these tales, the 2 men then recognize the man they have been travelling with for Jesus, only for him then to disappear. The Stalker relating himself to the role of Jesus, preaching of things to be predicted, and the tales of Porcupine being these equivalent of the Old Testament. The Stalker is hoping that the 2 men he leads on this road will be his disciples during this journey, something that, whilst the writer is awake, does not appreciate the sentiment. After all the men awake, they make their way further into the zone, meeting a grungy hallway. All the men, hesitant, decide to draw straws for who goes in first. The writer then enters the hallway and enters the most famous and visually striking room in this movie. We are that much closer to the centre of the zone, and it starts to take a toll on the writer, as after he wakes from being on the floor, he contemplates his role in life, a writer devoured by its readers, simply known as the writer in this story, and nothing more than that. The men walk into an open space. They can see the room at the end of their journey directly in front of them, but this brings all questions the men have to light, their motives, what may truly be their desires, as if they were to enter the room, leading to the professor's motives being shown. He came here as revenge. Revenge to his professional colleague who had slept with his wife, destroyed his reputation, and to take control over his own narrative, that this room is real and he will reach it and destroy it. After the bomb is revealed, the men fight on the floor. Stalker is denied as the writer sides with the professor, allowing him to keep the bomb. The Stalker breaks down as he sees this room as a god. Why would he want to destroy a god? Destroy faith itself? The men argue, as even though they have spent this entire time together, they still cannot relate to one another, and still doubt the powers, or if it does have this power, that it should never fall into the wrong hands. The Stalker pleads as he says he is a louse, his life is in the zone, his happiness. The writer calls him one of God's fools, using Porcupine as his example, a man who entered the room with a desire to bring back his brother who died in the same tunnel we'd went through earlier. only returned from the zone with riches. The room read Porcupine's desire and gave him that. Not his brother, but riches. If it is due to this or the possibility of survivor's guilt, Porcupine hung himself a week later. Writer fears this may be what happens to him and refuses to enter the room. The room reacts to the three men waiting outside of it as we see them sitting on the floor, the smallest part of the frame. It begins to rain. The professor starts to dismantle the bomb piece by piece and throws it into the room. We stay until the calm returns to the room. We see the pieces of the bomb become embedded into the zone, and now once again, violence has been drowned out by the zone. You return back to Sepia and the three men in the bar as the Stalker's wife and daughter walk in to take him away. The Stalker collapses when he gets home. He is helped into bed by his wife. She pulls out a pack of cigarettes and starts to monologue. Again, the Stalker being called a holy fool. But it is this foolishness that drew his wife to him. We end the movie in colour with their daughter referred to as Monkey as she starts to move the glasses on the table telekinetically until one falls off. Tarkovsky leaving the audience with one final question. Is the Stalker truly a holy fool when his daughter can create miracles? Whilst the Stalker's hellish journey may have been for naught, the same cannot be said for Tarkovsky's journey in making of the movie. To begin, Tarkovsky had just released his previous film The Mirror to much acclaim and was directing a production of Hamlet in the theatre that was causing him much stress. The film was intended to start filming in February of 1977. But the initial location they chose to film for the zone was struck by an earthquake nearby in Sharuba, Tajikistan. So it was delayed for a month and had to find a second location to film at. It was decided to move production to Tallinn, Estonia. It was this change that affected the rest of the film and caused the tragedies after the film was released. 2 months into filming and Tarkovsky is hating it. He hates his crew, complaining about their drinking habits, and whilst all this is happening, his mother suffers a stroke. Tarkovsky blames himself for this, and is only driving him down a lonely and miserable road. Filming is fraught with problems. I don't know how it'll work out. Boehm is drinking a lot. If I don't part company with him before the end of the film, I shall certainly never see him again. Taking from his journals during the time, Alexander Boehm was a production designer on the film at the time. By the time the film was finished, multiple of the crew were fired, replaced, or quit. By July, everything was shot and the film was being processed in a lab in Moscow, but by the time they had got the footage back, everything had a green tint and the film reels were corrupted beyond repair. One of the reasons for this may have been because of the new film they had used when filming, the Kodak 5247, something so new at the time that the Soviet developers were unfamiliar with what to do. So after everything Tarkovsky had gone through for the film, it was unusable. Tarkovsky, furious, fired Rurberg, the cinematographer who he had already had issues with throughout the shoot, blamed him, and the engineer who processed the negatives, Konoplyov. Tarkovsky ended his relationship with his photographer, even calling him a disreputable whore. Now comes the greater issue. Production had stopped for a month, and as now there is no more budget to make a movie again, Tarkovsky had to figure out a way to make it happen. During that time, between talks with the studio, a new cameraman, Kalishnikov, a new set designer, and Tarkovsky rewrote the script so the next thing they film would be completely new to everyone. And it is this version that we see in the final film. It was agreed that Stalker would become a 2-part movie to be justified given an extra budget, but now Tarkovsky had to film the movie with a much smaller budget than the first time. In April of 1978, Kalishnikov refused to work with Tarkovsky, even having his wife call all relevant officers stating so. Thankfully this time, continuing the film, again with a new cameraman, Natsky, and production manager Demidova, was brought on to finish the film. Doesn't mean that the issues stopped, as Tarkovsky described the production as bewitched. Production was halted for the 4th time, now due to Tarkovsky's withering health, as he had had a heart attack in April of 1978. Returning back to set, they finally finished production on the film in September. But even at the end, Tarkovsky had doubts. He didn't feel confident about his 3rd cameraman and felt that the film was going to fail. He ended up being very wrong about that. The earthquake that changed the location didn't only affect the filming, but the members of the crew and cast. When they changed to Tallinn, they had filmed in and around an abandoned hydroelectric power station, and filmed around the Jagala River, which was connected to a chemical plant upstream. Most of the cast and crew had gotten allergic reactions from the chemicals in the air. Sound recordist Vladimir Shaurin claims that it is this in which caused the deaths of Andrei and Larisa Tarkovsky and Anatoly Solzhenitsyn, who was the writer in the movie, all of which who had died of cancer. If you want to see the poisonous air they'd all been inhaling for months, you already have. It's in the film. The snow-like texture falling onto the foam and waste infecting the water, shown delicately and innocent, just like how the zone is. I truly cannot answer the question I asked myself at the start of this, as it asks what is the price of art, and furthermore, what is considered it. I wanted to make this video because the idea interested me. I was not a fan of Stalker before making this, and it has changed my viewpoint of the movie. But it's not what I want you to take away from this. I made this because I, like many others, want to be remembered. Do I think making YouTube videos is going to do that? Not exactly, but it's worth a try. A journey of my own at the end of this tale. I have spoken for myself, but I'll leave you with the words of the man himself.